The day had been circled on my calendar for weeks, a date etched in red ink that carried the weight of 45 years of motherhood. September 10th, my only daughter's birthday. Rebecca was turning 45, and to me, she was still the little girl who once clutched my hand so tightly she left imprints on my palm. I woke up before dawn, the way I used to when she was a child and birthdays were occasions of balloons, ribbons, and laughter. This time, though, I was alone in my small apartment, staring at a cake box that seemed heavier than it should have been. Inside was a decadent chocolate strawberry cake from her favorite bakery. $200, a ridiculous sum for someone living off a nurse's pension. But for Rebecca, no price ever felt too high. I imagined her face lighting up when she saw it. I pictured her eyes softening, even if just for a moment, as she remembered the birthdays when I had stayed up all night blowing balloons or sewing dresses. That image was enough to give me the strength to dress neatly, wrap my shawl around my shoulders, and head out into the crisp morning air. Rebecca lived in the house I had helped her buy, a house that had swallowed $150,000 of my life savings. Money I had hoarded over decades of double shifts, sore backs, and holidays spent in the hospital ward rather than at home. I had told myself it was worth it, that a mother's purpose was to sacrifice so her child could soar. When I reached her doorstep, my hands trembled with anticipation as I balanced the cake box. I knocked gently, my lips already curving into a smile. The door creaked open, and there she was, Rebecca, my daughter, my pride, my heartbreak. Except there was no smile, no joy, not even recognition in her eyes. Just a weary annoyance, as if the very sight of me had interrupted something precious. "Oh, it's you," she muttered, her gaze flicking past me, already bored. The smile froze on my lips. "Happy birthday, my love," I said, holding out the cake as though it were an offering at an altar. "Your favorite, chocolate with strawberries, just like when you were a little girl." She sighed, the sound sharp and impatient. "Come in, we need to talk. No thank you, no warmth, not even the pretense of affection." Inside her living room, I set the cake carefully on the coffee table, the candles already pressed into the frosting. The house gleamed with modern furniture, designer decor, and the unmistakable touch of money. My money. Yet it felt cold, like a museum where love had been deliberately excluded. Rebecca sat across from me, her arms crossed. Her face, once so soft with freckles and innocence, was now a mask of practiced indifference. "You know, Mom," she began, her tone flat, "I've been thinking a lot about birthdays, about presents, about what would actually make me happy." I leaned forward eagerly. "Of course, darling. Anything. A trip? Jewelry? Maybe that new car you mentioned? Just tell me, and I'll find a way." Her eyes locked onto mine then, and for the first time, I saw something I never thought I'd see there: contempt. "The best gift you could give me," she said slowly, each word dripping with venom, "is to just die." Time stopped. The air turned to glass, sharp and unbreathable. "What?" My voice cracked, a whisper torn from the depths of my chest. "You heard me," she continued coldly. "I'm tired of you, tired of your constant calls, your surprise visits, your neediness. My life would be easier if you were gone." My body trembled as though struck by lightning. 72 years of living, 45 years of being her mother. And never, never had I imagined hearing such words from her lips. "Rebecca," I stammered, tears pooling in my eyes, "I'm your mother. I've given you everything. I've sacrificed—" "Exactly," she snapped, standing abruptly. "You've suffocated me with your sacrifices. You're always here hovering, reminding me of what you've done. I can't breathe with you in my life. I need freedom." The $200 cake still sat between us, its candles beginning to droop as the wax softened. It looked absurd now, like a cruel parody of celebration. "But sweetheart," I pleaded, my voice breaking, "I just want to be close to you. You're all I have, and that's the problem." Her arms folded tighter, her expression like stone. "I'm all you have. You should have built your own life instead of clinging to mine. Go get one, and leave me alone." I rose from the sofa, my legs weak, the room spinning around me. Each step toward the door felt like walking through quicksand. At the threshold, I turned, desperate for even a flicker of remorse in her eyes. But all I saw was impatience, a silent demand for me to hurry and leave. "Happy birthday." "Rebecca," I whispered, my voice barely audible. And then I walked out, closing the door on the only child I had ever known how to love. The cake would end up in the trash. My tears would soak into the same sofa where I had once cradled her as a baby. But what Rebecca did not realize was that in shattering me, she had awakened something long dormant inside. Me. Something stronger than grief. Something sharper than heartbreak. Something dangerous. This was not the end of my story. This was the beginning. The apartment was silent when I returned that evening, but inside me, a storm howled louder than any I had weathered in 72 years of life. I closed the door gently behind me, though every fiber of my body longed to slam it, to release the rage boiling in my chest. Instead, I stood still, clutching the empty hands that once held the cake. As if they themselves could not believe the burden they had carried, I sank onto the old sofa, a faded relic from the days when my living room had been a playground, for a little girl with curly hair and boundless laughter. The fabric sagged beneath me, heavy with the weight of memories, bedtime stories whispered through yawns, feverish nights spent cooling a small forehead, mornings filled with hurried kisses before school. Now it was just me. Me and the echo of a sentence I could not erase. "The best gift you could give me is to just die." The words replayed mercilessly, each repetition cutting deeper like glass shards pressed against bare skin. I closed my eyes, hoping for darkness, but memory rushed in unbidden. I was 27 when Rebecca was born. A nurse working night shifts, my hands calloused from IV lines and endless paperwork, my feet aching from 12-hour rounds. I remember holding her for the first time, her tiny body swaddled in pink, and thinking, she is my purpose. She is the reason for everything. When she was 3, pneumonia nearly stole her. I had no money for the $200 antibiotic prescription. Insurance refused to cover it. Desperation left me trembling as I sold my late mother's jewelry, pieces that had survived wars and journeys across oceans, just to keep my daughter breathing. Rebecca never knew the cost of those golden heirlooms, but I carried the memory of pawning them like a brand seared onto my heart. At 16, she had begged for the perfect prom dress, a silk pink gown that shimmered under the department store lights. $800. I worked double weekends for 4 months straight, sacrificing every ounce of rest until I could place that dress in her hands. The way her eyes sparkled, the way she hugged me and whispered, "Thank you, Mom. You're the best in the world." I told myself it was worth every sleepless night. In college, she changed her major 3 times. Each shift meant new fees, more books, more tuition. I signed every check, ignoring the ache in my wrists, believing that one day, all this investment would return in love, in gratitude, in a daughter who would stand by me when my own body began to fail. And then there was the house that stood like a monument to my sacrifices. When she married David and wanted to settle down, she called me with trembling excitement. "Mom, we found the perfect place, but the down payment..." Before she could finish, I had promised to cover it. $150,000. My retirement fund gone in an instant, but her happiness mattered more than my future comfort. Or so I believed. I opened my eyes, staring at the cracked ceiling of my apartment. How had all of that, the jewelry, the dress, the checks, the house, led me here, abandoned and despised? The sofa seemed to whisper answers. Because you gave without limit. Because you mistook sacrifice for love. Because you poured your entire self into someone who only learned to take. A sob escaped me, sharp and unrestrained. My hands shook as I covered my face, ashamed of the tears yet powerless to stop them. I cried for the young woman I had been, full of hope. I cried for the child who once kissed my cheek and called me hero. And most of all, I cried for the mother I had become, used, discarded, unwanted. The cake. Oh, the cake. I had left it on the kitchen counter, its glossy frosting mocking me. I rose, my body trembling, and carried it to the trash bin. The candles had melted into grotesque shapes, like twisted remnants of a celebration that had never happened. With a heavy breath, I dropped the entire box inside. The thud it made echoed like a final nail in a coffin. That night, I could not sleep. I sat in the dark, staring at the framed photographs lining my shelf. Rebecca in her graduation gown, smiling wide. Rebecca on her wedding day, bouquet in hand. Rebecca, with the newborn twins, beaming at the camera. I reached for one photo, tracing the outline of her face with my finger. It felt like caressing a stranger. Had I been blind all along? Had she always harbored this coldness, hidden behind polite words and perfunctory hugs? Or had my relentless devotion suffocated her until resentment was all that remained? Questions swirled, each heavier than the last. The silence of the room pressed against my chest, and for the first time in decades, I felt utterly alone. But beneath the grief, something else stirred. A faint spark, small yet insistent. It whispered of anger, not the wild, consuming fire that destroys, but the steady flame that illuminates truth. I realized something brutal and undeniable. Rebecca did not value me. Not as a mother, not as a woman, not even as a human being. To her, I was a resource, a bank account, a babysitter, a safety net, and if I were truly honest, I had allowed it. I rose from the sofa, wiping the tears from my cheeks. My knees cracked as I walked to the bathroom, flicking on the harsh fluorescent light. In the mirror, a tired old woman stared back at me. Lines etched across her face like maps of battles fought and lost. But her eyes, they were sharper now, clearer. "This is not the end," I whispered to my reflection. Not yet. The words startled me, but they rang with a truth I had not felt in years. Yes, Rebecca had shattered me. But in the shards of that brokenness, I could see something glinting. Something stronger than grief. Something I had forgotten I possessed. Myself. That night marked a turning point. I did not know yet what I would do, or how. But I knew this. I would no longer be the woman who existed only for her daughter. For the first time in 45 years, I began to wonder what my life could look like if it belonged to me. And though my heart ached with loss, a seed of resolve took root inside me. Rebecca had wished for my death, but what she had unknowingly given me was rebirth. Morning light crept through the blinds, thin stripes of gold cutting across the gray walls of my apartment. I had not slept, though my body ached with exhaustion. My eyes burned from tears shed and unshed, but inside me, something had hardened. The sentence, "The best gift you could give me is to just die," still echoed, but its sharpness had dulled. It was no longer a knife tearing me apart. It had become fuel. For the first time in years, I was not thinking about Rebecca's needs, her bills, her children, her fragile feelings. I was thinking about me, and the more I thought, the more I realized how thoroughly I had been erased by the very person I gave everything to. I shuffled to the kitchen and brewed a pot of bitter coffee, the aroma filling the room. I hadn't drunk it black in decades. Rebecca always said it was too harsh, so I sweetened it for her visits. But today, I sipped the bitterness as if reclaiming a part of myself that had long been denied. As I drank, memories flooded back. The pawnshop receipt for my mother's jewelry, the overtime shifts to pay for prom, the checks written for tuition, the bank transfer for the down payment. Each memory rose like evidence in a courtroom, building a case against my own blindness. I pulled out a notebook, one I had once used for grocery lists and babysitting schedules, and began to write. Not recipes, not errands, a record, the sacrifice ledger. Page by page, I listed everything I had given up: money, time, health, dreams. I wrote down the hours spent in emergency rooms, the nights spent awake by her fevered side, the vacations never taken, the clothes I never bought so she could have the latest sneakers. By the 10th page, my hand trembled, not from weakness but from revelation. Seeing it all in ink stripped away the fog of sentimentality. The truth was undeniable. I had bankrupted myself for her life. And in return, she had wished for my death. The coffee grew cold. My stomach twisted, not from hunger, but from clarity. "I won't be used anymore," I said aloud, my voice startling me in the quiet room. The words didn't sound like mine. They sounded stronger, bolder. I repeated them, louder this time. "I won't be used anymore. The walls seemed to absorb the declaration, and for once, they did not echo sadness back at me. By afternoon, I was at my desk, pulling out the thick folder of documents I had ignored for years, my will, my bank statements, my property deeds. The papers smelled faintly of dust, like relics of a woman I no longer recognized. Rebecca's name was everywhere. Beneficiary, co-signer, emergency contact. It felt like I had signed away my identity in black ink, handing her not just my love but my entire existence. I picked up a pen, the weight of it suddenly liberating. My hand hovered over the will. The idea came slowly, cautiously, like a flame flickering to life, but once it appeared, it refused to leave. What if she got nothing? The thought sent a thrill through me, followed by a pang of guilt. Mothers weren't supposed to think this way. Mothers were supposed to forgive endlessly, to endure every cruelty with grace. But then again, mothers weren't supposed to be told their death would be the greatest gift. The guilt evaporated. I called my lawyer. Her office smelled of leather and ambition, the shelves lined with thick books embossed in gold. She had known me for years, mostly as the woman who signed checks quietly, who never questioned or demanded. But that day when I sat across from her, something in my posture must have revealed the shift. "I want to revise my will," I said firmly. She raised her brows but nodded. "To what extent?" "To every extent," I replied. "Erase her name, all of it. Replace it with charity. Or better yet, don't decide yet. Leave it blank. I want time to think." "But she will not see a dime." The lawyer studied me, perhaps searching for hesitation. When she found none, she simply said, "Very well." Signing the new documents felt like unclipping shackles from my wrists. Each stroke of the pen was a declaration. I am more than her mother. I am myself. That evening, I returned home with the new will safely tucked into my bag. I poured myself a glass of cheap wine, the kind Rebecca once mocked, and raised it in a toast to the empty room. "To freedom," I whispered. The wine burned my throat, but the fire matched the one igniting inside me. Over the next few days, I began small rebellions. I stopped answering Rebecca's texts. I let her calls go to voicemail. The silence stretched, and though part of me expected her to show up in person, demanding explanations, she didn't. Perhaps she assumed I would crawl back as always. Perhaps she didn't care. Either way, the quiet was a gift. With no errands to run for her, no babysitting to schedule, no emergencies to solve, I found myself staring at a vast horizon of empty time. At first it was terrifying. Who was I without her needs? But soon, the emptiness became possibility. I went to a local bookstore, something I hadn't done in years. I wandered through aisles, touching spines of novels I had once devoured in youth. I bought 3. I visited a park, sitting on a bench with a notebook, watching children chase pigeons while their mothers laughed. I didn't feel envy, only a quiet nostalgia. And one evening, as the sun bled pink across the sky, I realized I was breathing easier. The pain of her words was still there, but it no longer defined me. It had transformed into a strange kind of freedom, the kind born from hitting rock bottom and realizing there was nothing left to lose. The true breaking point came one night. When she finally called, the phone buzzed on my nightstand, her name flashing across the screen. For a moment, instinct tugged at me. Answer, explain, soothe. But then I remembered. She had already spoken her truth. I let it ring. And as it fell silent, a rush of empowerment surged through me. Ignoring her was not weakness. It was strength. For the first time in my life, I was no longer defined by my daughter's approval. Lying in bed that night, I felt the seed of a new idea sprouting. Something wild, something reckless. What if I left? Not just emotionally, but physically. What if I packed a suitcase and vanished, lived somewhere no one knew me as Rebecca's mother? The thought sent shivers down my spine. At first I dismissed it as fantasy, but the more I imagined it, boarding a plane, walking foreign streets, tasting freedom, the more it felt like destiny. And so, in the stillness of that night, I made a decision. I would not die as a martyr in my own home. I would live, fully, fiercely, selfishly, For the first time in my life, the breaking point had come and gone. Now, it was time to break free. The morning I walked into the bank, I felt like a thief in reverse. I wasn't there to steal. I was there to reclaim what was mine. The teller, a young man with gelled hair and tired eyes, greeted me with the mechanical smile reserved for clients who look like they should be knitting instead of making financial decisions. "How may I help you today, ma'am?" "I want to remove my daughter's name from all joint accounts," I said, my voice steady. His smile faltered. "Are you sure?" "That will require—" "Yes," I interrupted. "I am very sure." The words hung in the air like a verdict. As he tapped at his keyboard, I glanced at the reflection of myself in the glass partition, an old woman in a beige cardigan, hair silvered and neatly pinned. To him, I probably looked like someone's grandmother, gentle, compliant, harmless. But inside, I was a soldier reclaiming lost territory. When I signed the final form, the pen scratched like a blade across paper. The accounts were mine again, mine alone. From the bank, I walked straight to the mortgage office. The house, the shrine of my sacrifices, was still under my name, though Rebecca and David lived there. I had been paying property taxes quietly year after year like a ghost benefactor. "Sell it," I told the agent. He blinked. "Sell? But—" "Listed immediately," I said, sharper this time. "Cash buyers preferred." I half expected guilt to choke me, but instead, exhilaration surged through me. For decades, that house had been a monument to Rebecca's entitlement. Now, it would become the funding for my escape. That evening, my phone buzzed. "Rebecca," I almost laughed. She must have gotten wind of the changes already. I didn't answer. Instead, I poured myself another glass of wine and spread travel brochures across the table. Europe, Asia, South America. The possibilities glittered like jewels. Switzerland caught my eye, snow-capped mountains, serene lakes, cities humming with both history and modernity. A place far enough that Rebecca couldn't simply drive over in anger. A place where no one knew me. I circled it in red ink. The next day, I stood in front of my closet, staring at clothes chosen for practicality, for motherhood, for blending into the background of someone else's story. I pulled out a suitcase, its zipper stiff from disuse, and began to fill it, not with what Rebecca would approve of, with what I wanted. A scarlet scarf I had bought years ago, but never worn because she said it was too loud. A pair of leather boots I'd hidden away, too expensive for a woman who should be saving for the kids. Books I loved, journals I'd never dared to write in. Piece by piece, I packed not just fabric, but fragments of myself. Rebecca's calls grew more frequent. Dozens of missed calls stacked up, her voicemails shifting from sweet to sour. "Mom, where are you? Why aren't you answering? Mom, this isn't funny. I need you to call me back. Mom, what the hell is going on with the bank? With the house? Are you losing it?" Each message was proof that my silence hurt her more than my presence ever did. One evening, she left the final voicemail. "If you don't call me back, I swear I'll come over." I listened, then deleted it. For the first time, I felt no fear. The day I booked my ticket, my hands trembled not from hesitation, but from exhilaration. One way to Zurich, business class. Expensive, yes. But what was the point of hoarding money for a daughter who wished me dead? I printed the ticket, tucking it between the pages of a book like a secret promise. That night, I lit a single candle on my kitchen table. Not for celebration, but for farewell. I whispered to the flame, goodbye to the old me, the mother who gave everything and asked for nothing. She's gone. The candle flickered, as if in agreement. The final severing came when I met my lawyer again. "I want to transfer my estate," I told her. "Not just erase Rebecca's name, redirect it. To causes I care about, to shelters, schools, hospitals." She looked at me curiously. "Nothing for the family?" "Family isn't always blood," I said. "Sometimes family is the people who don't ask you to die on your birthday." When I left her office, the papers were sealed. Rebecca's inheritance had vanished like smoke. On my last night in the apartment, I sat by the window, watching the city lights blink like scattered stars. For the first time in years, my chest felt light. Yes, there was fear. I was 72, not 20. Traveling alone into the unknown wasn't easy. But compared to the suffocating cage of Rebecca's disdain, even fear felt like freedom. I picked up my pen and wrote in my journal, "Tomorrow I will fly. Tomorrow I will live." At dawn, as the taxi carried me to the airport, I glanced back at the skyline one last time. My phone buzzed again, Rebecca's name glowing on the screen. I turned it off. The airport doors slid open before me, and with my suitcase in hand, I stepped into a new life. The ties were severed, and for the first time in decades, I belonged only to myself. The plane lifted off the runway with a roar, and for the first time in my life, I felt like gravity itself had loosened its grip on me. As the city shrank below, all its tangled obligations, unanswered voicemails, and suffocating expectations grew smaller and smaller until they were nothing but a cluster of lights dissolving into the horizon. I leaned back into the plush seat of business class. Clutching a glass of champagne, the stewardess had placed gently in my hand. The bubbles tickled my nose, unfamiliar yet intoxicating. I had spent decades flying coach, when I flew at all, sacrificing comfort for frugality, always reminding myself that the kids come first. But now, there were no kids to come first. There was only me. I raised the glass in a silent toast. To freedom. The flight stretched long into the night, but instead of exhaustion, I felt wired with anticipation. I devoured a novel I had tucked into my carry-on, a thriller set in the Swiss Alps. Every page a reminder that soon I would breathe that crisp mountain air. Occasionally, the thought of Rebecca crept in. I wondered if she had discovered the empty accounts, the house listed for sale, the will rewritten. I imagined her rage, her confusion, her desperate attempts to call. For a brief moment, guilt stirred, whispering that perhaps I'd gone too far. But then I remembered her birthday wish. That brutal sentence sharpened with entitlement. No, I had not gone too far. I had finally gone far enough. When the plane descended into Zurich, the sun was just cresting the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of rose and gold. I pressed my forehead against the window, awestruck by the jagged mountains piercing the clouds, their peaks shimmering like crowns of light. The air at the airport smelled different, cleaner, crisper, carrying a faint hint of snow even though it was spring. I breathed it in deeply, as though I could cleanse decades of sorrow from my lungs. "Welcome to Switzerland," the customs officer said, stamping my passport. The sound of the stamp was like a gavel. A verdict. A new beginning. I checked into a small boutique hotel near Lake Zurich, its windows overlooking the water that sparkled like liquid glass. The receptionist greeted me with warmth, speaking a lilting English tinged with German. No one here knew my name. No one knew Rebecca. No one knew I was a mother discarded. Here, I was simply a traveler, a woman with a suitcase and a future untethered. I stood in the room for a long time, just staring at the bed, the balcony, the wardrobe. Not because they were extraordinary, but because they were mine. No one else's needs, no one else's mess, no one else's demands. Just mine. That first afternoon, I wandered the cobblestone streets of Zurich's old town. The air carried the aroma of fresh bread and roasting coffee, mingling with the faint perfume of blooming tulips in window boxes. I bought myself a pastry dusted with sugar, something I hadn't indulged in since before Rebecca was born. The buttery layers melted on my tongue, and I laughed aloud, startling the vendor. It wasn't just a croissant. It was rebellion, flaky and sweet. Days passed in a blur of wonder. I took a boat ride across the lake, the water so still it mirrored the sky. I hiked gentle trails at the base of the Alps, marveling at wildflowers clinging stubbornly to rocky cliffs. I rode trains that wound through valleys, every bend revealing villages so picturesque they looked painted. Everywhere I went, I carried a small journal. I scribbled notes, sketches, fragments of feelings. For years, I had recorded grocery lists and babysitting schedules. Now, I was writing memories that belonged to me alone. One evening, sitting at a cafe terrace overlooking the river, I wrote a single sentence that crystallized everything. I am not running away from her, I am running toward myself. But freedom was not without shadows. At night, When the laughter of strangers faded and silence returned, loneliness crept in. I had spent so long defined by motherhood that the absence of it sometimes felt like a hollow ache. I would catch myself glancing at families in the park, a pang tugging at me as children clambered onto their mothers' laps. I wondered if I had failed, if somewhere along the way my love had twisted into chains that bound Rebecca instead of nurturing her. But then I remembered her face that day at the door, cold, unyielding, cruel. And the ache lessened. A week into my stay, I met Marianne. She was a widow from France, traveling solo, her silver hair cut stylishly short and her laugh infectious. We struck up a conversation over coffee, and by evening, we were sharing stories on the hotel balcony. She told me about her late husband, about raising children who had grown distant, about rediscovering herself in travel. "You must not let them steal the rest of your years," she said, her accent softening each word. "We gave them life. That is enough. Now it is our turn." Her words sank deep, watering the fragile roots of my resolve. For the first time in decades, I felt kinship, not with a daughter who drained me, but with a woman who understood. Together, Marianne and I began exploring further. Day trips to Lucerne, a weekend in the Bernese Oberland. We rode cable cars up mountains where the world seemed endless, our laughter carried away by the wind. With each passing day, I felt my spine straighten, my step quicken. The old woman in the bathroom mirror was still there, but her eyes no longer looked broken. They looked alive. Back home, I knew chaos must be brewing. Rebecca's silence was loud in its own way. No more voicemails, no more texts. I imagined her scheming, plotting, perhaps even involving lawyers. But thousands of miles away, her tantrums were powerless. I no longer jumped at the sound of a phone. I no longer braced for demands. In Switzerland, I was untouchable. On my last night in Zurich before heading deeper into the Alps, I stood on the balcony of my hotel, gazing at the moon's reflection rippling across the lake. I thought about the woman I had been, the mother who pawned heirlooms, the worker who slaved through nights, the fool who believed unconditional love would one day be returned. And then I thought about the woman I was becoming, the traveler, the friend, the writer of her own story. Tears welled in my eyes. But they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude. Gratitude for survival, for courage, for the rare gift of starting over at 72. I whispered into the night air, as if speaking to the mountains themselves, "I am free." And the echo that came back was not silence, it was freedom answering me. The first sign that my disappearance had shaken Rebecca's carefully constructed world arrived 3 days after I settled into a rented apartment in the foothills of the Swiss Alps. My phone buzzed violently on the table where I had tossed it, face down, intending to forget it even existed. When I finally picked it up, the screen displayed a list of missed calls so long it seemed endless. 47 calls, 23 messages, all from Rebecca and David. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen, my stomach tight. Part of me wanted to hear their voices, to believe perhaps, against reason, that remorse had bloomed where cruelty once thrived. But when I opened the first voicemail, reality struck hard. "Mom, this is ridiculous," Rebecca snapped. Her voice carried the same sharpness it had the day she told me to die. "The kids are asking about you. Stop being dramatic and call me back. You can't just walk away from your family." The second message was softer, David's tone practiced and pleading. "Julieta, please. Rebecca didn't mean it. She's under so much stress, you know that? We need you. The kids need you. Please come back." The third, however, betrayed the truth. Rebecca again, voice clipped with frustration. "If you don't answer soon, we're going to call the police. Don't think you can just abandon us after everything we've done for you. After everything they had done for me." I laughed bitterly. The absurdity of it all was almost comedic. By the end of the week, the messages escalated from pleas to threats. "You can't just cut us off financially," David's voice snarled in one recording. Those accounts were joint. "We'll fight this." Rebecca's text messages were sharper still. "You're not thinking straight. I'll tell everyone you've lost your mind. Don't forget I have the power to keep you away from the kids. That last one nearly broke me. Not because I feared losing access to my grandchildren, they had never truly been mine to hold, but because it revealed her weapon of choice, manipulation. She had wielded it for years, cloaking it in guilt and obligation, but this time, it bounced off me like dull steel against stone. I sought counsel in the quiet strength of my neighbor in Zurich, an elderly woman named Elvira who had lived through her own battles with ungrateful children. She listened as I read the messages aloud, her eyes narrowing with each word. "Classic tactics," she said, sipping her tea. "They want the benefits without the responsibility. They will threaten you, guilt you, even try to paint you as unstable. Do not waver," her certainty steadied me. For once, I wasn't a lone soldier in this war. A few days later, a new storm erupted. My lawyer, Anel, called me from back home. His voice was grave. "Giulietta, I've received notice that Rebecca has filed a petition challenging your recent legal decisions. She's claiming you weren't in your right mind when you altered the will and reclaimed property rights." I felt my throat tighten. "Can she do that?" "She can try," he said. "But she'll need evidence. Medical evaluations, testimony. If we prepare documentation from your doctor here, plus proof of your independence, her case will crumble." For a moment, fear threatened to undo me. The thought of being dragged into legal battles, of being forced to justify my sanity, exhausted me. But then I remembered Rebecca's smirk, her cold eyes, her words. "The best gift would be if you just died." I straightened in my chair. "Do what you must. She won't take this from me." News of her petition seemed to embolden Rebecca. Her next voicemail was venomous. "You think you're so clever running off like this? Everyone knows you're unstable. When the judge hears about your little disappearing act, he'll side with me. You can't escape family, Mom. You belong to me." Those last words seared. "You belong to me. No, not anymore." I deleted the message without replying. Meanwhile, Switzerland welcomed me with open arms. I filled my days with hikes along wildflower-strewn meadows, afternoons painting by the lake, evenings sharing stories with Marianne and Elvira. Life here pulsed with a rhythm I had never known. Slow, deliberate, beautiful. One afternoon, as I sipped coffee by the lake, my phone buzzed again. This time the number was unfamiliar, an American line. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mrs. Johnson?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Sarah Williams from Family Services. We've received a complaint regarding your well-being. Your daughter believes you may be suffering from dementia." For a heartbeat, the world tilted. Rebecca's audacity knew no bounds. "I assure you," I said firmly, "I am of sound mind. I am living independently in Switzerland. Would you like documentation?" "Yes," the social worker replied. "If you can provide a medical evaluation, that will close the case." Within days, a Swiss physician examined me thoroughly and declared me not only healthy, but remarkably sharp for my age. The report was sent to the consulate, and soon after, Sarah called back. "Mrs. Johnson, your daughter's allegations were unfounded. The case is closed." Vindication washed over me like warm sunlight. For once, the system had recognized truth over manipulation. Still, the calls from Rebecca and David did not stop. If anything, they multiplied. Pleas, threats, accusations, sometimes within the same hour. But something inside me had shifted. Their words no longer pierced. They simply echoed, empty and desperate, while I built a life too full to be interrupted. The reckoning, I realized, was not just theirs. It was mine too. For decades, I had believed my worth was measured by sacrifice. Every dollar spent, every night forfeited, every dream postponed had been a brick in the altar I built to motherhood. I thought love meant surrender. Now I saw clearly, surrender had only bred entitlement. Love without respect had become exploitation. The reckoning was this: I was no longer willing to be exploited. One evening, as the sun set behind the Alps, painting the sky in strokes of violet and gold, I sat with Marianne and Elvira on the terrace of our favorite cafe. The air buzzed with conversation, but we three sat in comfortable silence until Marianne spoke. "You realize, Giulietta, you're not just living your life. You're teaching her a lesson. Whether she learns it or not, that's her choice. But you've shown her that a mother is not a slave." I let her words settle. For so long I had sought validation from Rebecca, begging silently for scraps of affection. Now, here was validation of a different kind, from women who had walked the same path, who knew the cost of silence, who applauded my defiance. For the first time, I allowed myself a small smile. The reckoning had arrived, and I was no longer afraid. The first morning, I awoke without checking my phone for messages from Rebecca felt like the true beginning of freedom. The sun spilled through the lace curtains of my small alpine apartment, painting delicate patterns on the wooden floor. For once, I didn't feel the usual knot of dread that had accompanied each sunrise back home. Dread of what cutting remark Rebecca might sling my way. Dread of which bill needed paying. Dread of how I might stretch myself thinner to appease everyone but myself. Here, in Switzerland, the morning was mine. I began by walking into town, where the cobblestone streets curved like veins through the heart of Zurich. Market stalls spilled over with fresh bread, jars of honey glowing amber in the sunlight, baskets of apples polished as if by care itself. I bought a loaf, still warm from the oven, and tore off a piece as I walked. The steam rose, carrying with it the scent of butter and grain. For the first time in years, I ate without guilt. Not guilt for calories, not guilt for money spent, not guilt for taking up space. Just simple, unadulterated pleasure. My days soon fell into a rhythm. Mornings for writing, though I did not yet know what shape those words would take, afternoons for wandering, evenings for conversation with Marianne and Elvira. Marianne loved to reminisce about her years working as a midwife, stories of babies born in stormy nights and in quiet kitchens. Elvira, ever sharp-tongued, offered commentary on everything from politics to poetry. "Women like us," she said one evening over schnapps, "we are invisible until we stop being useful. Then, suddenly, everyone notices, but only because they panic about losing what we provide." I laughed, though it was tinged with sorrow. That's exactly how Rebecca treats me, as though I'm an appliance gone missing. "Then good riddance," Elvira replied, raising her glass. May she learn to wash her own dishes. Yet it wasn't just companionship that nurtured me. The landscape itself seemed to whisper healing into my bones. I hiked trails that wound through meadows thick with wildflowers, the air buzzing with bees and the faint clang of cowbells drifting from hillsides. I let the silence wash over me, punctuated only by my own breathing. On one hike, I stumbled upon a small chapel perched precariously on a cliffside. Its door stood open, the wood worn smooth by centuries of hands. Inside, candles flickered, their light dancing across faded frescoes. I sat in the pew, not to pray but to breathe. For the first time in years, I felt the vastness of my own existence, small, yes, but unburdened, unclaimed. Letters from Rebecca still came, though fewer now. She tried alternating tactics, one letter scrawled with apologies, the next filled with accusations. "You abandoned us when we needed you most. The children cry for you every night. You're selfish. Mom, this isn't who you are, but I knew better." This was who I was, the woman who refused to be shackled by guilt any longer. I read the letters, folded them neatly, and placed them in a box I labeled past. One afternoon, while exploring a bookstore tucked away on a narrow street, I found myself drawn to a section labeled Memoir. Titles lined the shelves, stories of women who had walked through fire and written their way out of it. I pulled down a book by a woman who had escaped a controlling marriage. Her words pulsed with pain, but also with defiance. At the end, she wrote, "Our stories are maps. Without them, other women may never find the road to freedom." The sentence lingered with me for days. Could I write my own map? The thought terrified me. But each morning thereafter, I opened my notebook and wrote, not for Rebecca, not for David, not for the world, but for myself. I wrote about the cake left to rot on Rebecca's counter. I wrote about the countless bills I had paid. I wrote about the moment she wished me dead. And I wrote about the first sip of coffee by the lake in Zurich, when I realized I was alive in a way I had never been before. Slowly, what began as scattered notes turned into chapters. My words spilled faster than I could catch them. Marianne and Elvira became my first readers, nodding, gasping, sometimes laughing at the irony woven through my past. "This," Marianne said one night, tapping the pages, "is not just therapy. It is truth. Women need this truth." Her faith planted a seed in me. As the weeks passed, invitations arrived. Elvira introduced me to her book club, a circle of women ranging from young mothers to retirees. They welcomed me with open arms, eager to hear my story. I shared pieces of my writing, nervous at first, but soon their eyes shone with recognition. One woman reached for my hand. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered. "Reading this, it makes me feel less alone." Her words struck deeper than any letter Rebecca had sent. In that moment, I understood. My story was not a wound to hide, but a lantern to lift. Freedom brought joy in unexpected forms. I tried painting again, smearing colors across canvas with clumsy hands. The results were far from masterpieces, but they captured something photographs never could: the rush of wind on the mountain, the shimmer of light on the lake, the pulse of freedom in my chest. I even allowed myself luxuries I once deemed selfish. A silk scarf in a shade of emerald that made my eyes dance. A meal at a restaurant where the waiter described each course like poetry. A weekend trip to Lucerne, where I wandered aimlessly along the lake, smiling at strangers, tasting life as though it were new. Yet amid the laughter and discovery, a shadow lingered. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, I wondered about Rebecca. Did she still seethe with anger? Did she ever regret the words that had sliced through me like knives? Did my grandchildren truly cry for me, or were they merely pawns in her game? The questions haunted, but they no longer chained me. I allowed them to drift like clouds across my mind, never blocking the sun for long. By autumn, my book was nearly complete. Tentatively, I reached out to a small publisher recommended by Marianne's niece. To my astonishment, they agreed to read my manuscript. When the acceptance letter arrived weeks later, I sat at the kitchen table, trembling. My words, my pain, my rebirth, it would all become a book. I titled it, "The Cake That Never Was." It felt right. That cake symbolized everything: the love unappreciated, the effort discarded, the turning point that set me free. On the day I signed the publishing contract, I walked to the lake with Marianne and Elvira. We clinked glasses of champagne as the sunset bled across the sky. "To new dawns," Marianne toasted. "To courage," Elvira added, and I, raising my glass high, whispered, "To freedom." For the first time in my life, the word didn't feel like fantasy. It felt like home. The day my book was published, the world felt different. I held the first printed copy in trembling hands. The cover a simple design, a faded birthday cake with a single candle burning bright against the darkness. The title, "The Cake That Never Was," curved above it in elegant script. My name, Julietta Johnson, gleamed beneath. I traced the letters as though to confirm they were real. For decades I had been invisible, just mom, just grandma, just the silent wallet and the weary shoulders. But now, here I stood, an author, my voice carved into pages no one could erase. The launch was modest, held in a small Zurich bookstore where I had once lost myself among memoirs. Chairs were arranged in a half circle, glasses of wine balanced on a side table, candles flickering in the evening light. When I began to read aloud, my voice shook. But as I looked into the faces of the women before me, I saw recognition. Tears welled in their eyes, not because they pitied me, but because they saw themselves mirrored in my words. Afterward, a young mother approached, clutching her child to her hip. "Your story," she whispered. "It gave me the courage to tell my husband no." For the first time in years. Her words struck me harder than applause ever could. In that moment, I understood. My pain had been transfigured into power, not just for me, but for others. News of the book traveled farther than I expected. A journalist interviewed me for a women's magazine, calling my story a manifesto of liberation for overlooked mothers. Invitations arrived to speak at gatherings and panels. I declined most, but sometimes I accepted, sharing my story in measured doses, careful not to let the past consume the present. What surprised me most was the silence from Rebecca. For weeks after the book's release, I braced for her fury. Surely she would rage at the betrayal, accuse me of airing dirty laundry, of humiliating her. But no letter came, no voicemail, no threat of lawsuit, only silence. At first it unnerved me. Silence was unlike her. But gradually, I came to see it for what it was. Acknowledgement. Whether she read the book or ignored it, she knew now that I had spoken and that my voice was beyond her control. Autumn deepened into winter. Snow dusted the rooftops, lakes froze into mirrors, and Christmas lights strung across Zurich glowed like constellations. One evening, I sat at my desk, staring at a blank page. My book was done, but something remained unsaid. I realized then what it was. I had never spoken directly to Rebecca since leaving. Every response had been silence. Perhaps that was strength, but part of me longed for closure, not reconciliation, but a final word. So I picked up my pen and began to write. The final letter. Dear Rebecca, this is not an apology, nor is it an attempt to reopen the door I closed. It is simply a letter, my last to you. You once told me the best gift I could give you was my death. For months those words hollowed me out. I carried them like stones in my chest. But now, standing where I am, I see them differently. They were not a curse. They were a key. With those words, you unlocked a prison I had built myself. I was never meant to live only for you. I was never meant to erase myself so you could shine brighter. Motherhood is sacrifice, yes, but it should never be annihilation. You believed my worth was measured in what I gave. I believed it too, for far too long. But I now know my worth is in my being, not my giving. I no longer belong to you. I belong to myself. I do not know if you will ever understand this. Perhaps you will cling to anger or denial or shame. That is your burden to carry, not mine. If someday you choose to live differently, to see your children not as servants, but as whole people, then perhaps you will look back on this and see the lesson. Until then, I leave you with silence and peace. Goodbye. Mom, when I finished, tears blurred the ink. But they were not tears of sorrow. They were release. I sealed the letter in an envelope but never mailed it. Instead, I tucked it inside the back cover of my book, a private epilogue. If Rebecca wanted to read my truth, it was already in print for the world. She didn't need the letter. The letter was for me. Months later, my publisher sent me an email. Sales had exceeded expectations. Translations were underway. Readers from across continents wrote in, sharing stories of their own fractured families, their own rediscovered strength. I read each message carefully. Some made me ache, others made me smile, but all confirmed what I had come to believe. My story was no longer mine alone. It belonged to every woman who had been told she was selfish for wanting more than servitude. One spring morning, Marianne, Elvira, and I sat in a cafe overlooking the lake. The air smelled of blooming lilacs, and the water sparkled beneath the sun. "You've changed," Marianne observed, stirring her tea. "When I met you, you were hunched, as if the world weighed too much. Now you sit tall." "I feel tall," I admitted. "For the first time I feel seen, not as a tool, not as a mother, not as a wallet, but as myself." Elvira grinned. A new dawn indeed. That night, I opened my journal one last time to write. Not a chapter, not a letter, but a promise. I will live fully. I will laugh loudly. I will never again apologize for existing. My life is my own, and it begins now. As I set down the pen, I felt the warmth of sunrise even in the darkness, because the dawn was not just coming. It was already here,